Have you ever wondered what it would take to command the very forces of nature, to speak to the sun itself and have it listen, to wield power so extraordinary that even the laws of physics bend to your will? Well, get ready to discover the incredible true story of a man who did exactly that. A man whose name echoes through history, not just as a warrior or a leader, but as someone who literally stopped the sun in its tracks. This is the untold story of Joshua, and by the end of this journey, you'll understand why his life represents one of the most remarkable demonstrations of faith and divine power ever recorded. We're not just talking about military victories or political achievements here. We're talking about a man who commanded celestial bodies, brought down impenetrable walls with a shout, and led an entire nation through impossible circumstances. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. Joshua didn't start as a hero. He began as a servant, a follower, someone standing in the shadow of the greatest leader Israel had ever known. I'm going to reveal 3 mind-blowing aspects of Joshua's story that most people never hear about. First, the extraordinary preparation that transformed him from a servant into a commander capable of supernatural feats. Second, the specific moment when heaven itself intervened in human warfare in a way that defied every natural law. And third, the lasting impact of his leadership that shaped not just one nation, but influenced the course of world history forever. But before we dive into these incredible revelations, let me share something that will blow your mind. I've spent countless hours researching ancient texts, archaeological findings, and historical records to bring you details about Joshua that you won't find in your typical Sunday school lesson. This isn't just a religious story. It's a historical account that challenges everything we think we know about what's possible when divine power meets human obedience. Our story begins not in victory, but in defeat, not in triumph, but in tragedy. Picture this: an entire generation of people wandering in a vast wilderness, carrying with them the weight of broken promises and shattered dreams. For 40 long years, they had been walking through the desert, and now their greatest leader, Moses, was about to die. The man who had confronted Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, and received the 10 Commandments, was preparing to leave them forever. Can you imagine the fear that must have gripped the hearts of the Israelites? They were about to lose the only leader most of them had ever known. Moses wasn't just their political leader. He was their connection to the divine, their source of miracles, their guide through impossible situations. Without him, how could they possibly face the challenges ahead? The promised land wasn't going to be handed to them on a silver platter. It was occupied by fierce warriors, fortified cities, and giants who made ordinary men look like grasshoppers. But God had been preparing someone in the shadows, someone who had been watching, learning, and being shaped for this exact moment. Joshua, son of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, had been serving as Moses' assistant for decades. While others complained about the hardships of wilderness life, Joshua was learning leadership. While others grumbled about the challenges ahead, Joshua was developing unshakable faith. Here's what's fascinating about Joshua's preparation. It wasn't glamorous. He wasn't born into royalty or given immediate recognition. The first time we encounter him in Scripture, he's simply called Moses' aide. He was doing the unglamorous work of serving, supporting, and learning from a master. But this seemingly insignificant role was actually the most important training program in human history. Think about this. Joshua was present during some of the most pivotal moments in Israel's journey. When Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the law, Joshua went partway up the mountain with him. When the Israelites built the golden calf and chaos erupted in the camp, Joshua was there. When Moses spoke face to face with God in the tent of meeting, Joshua remained in the tent even after Moses left. This wasn't coincidence. This was divine preparation. But Joshua's training went far beyond just observing miracles. He was being forged in the fires of real-world challenges. When Israel needed to scout out the promised land, Moses chose 12 men to go as spies. Joshua was among them, and what happened next would reveal the true character of the man who would one day command the sun. The 12 spies spent 40 days exploring the land of Canaan. They saw its incredible fertility, its abundant resources, and its strategic importance. But they also saw its inhabitants, powerful people living in fortified cities, including the descendants of Anak, giants who struck terror into the hearts of ordinary men. When the spies returned, 10 of them delivered a report that crushed the spirit of the entire nation. "We can't attack those people," they said. "They are stronger than we are. The land devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Can you imagine the fear that swept through the camp? Here were their own scouts, men chosen for their courage and leadership, telling them that the mission was impossible. The dream of the promised land suddenly seemed like a nightmare waiting to happen. But 2 men saw things differently. Joshua and his fellow spy Caleb stood before the entire assembly of Israel and delivered a radically different report. "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good," they declared. "If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." This wasn't just optimism, this was prophetic vision. While 10 spies saw giants and obstacles, Joshua saw opportunities and divine intervention. While they calculated human odds, he factored in divine power. While they focused on the strength of the enemy, he focused on the faithfulness of God. But here's where the story takes a tragic turn. The people believed the majority report. They rejected Joshua's faith-filled vision and chose fear instead. They were ready to stone Joshua and Caleb for their unrealistic assessment. The result? God pronounced judgment on that entire generation. Every adult who had left Egypt would die in the wilderness, except for Joshua and Caleb. Only these 2 men would live to see the fulfillment of God's promises. This means Joshua spent the next 38 years watching an entire generation die around him. Think about the weight of that. Every funeral, every burial, every loss was a reminder of what happens when people choose fear over faith. But it was also a constant reinforcement of this truth. God keeps His promises, and those who trust Him completely will see His faithfulness, even when circumstances seem impossible. During these wilderness years, Joshua wasn't just waiting. He was being refined, tested, and prepared for leadership. He led military campaigns against enemies who attacked Israel. He learned to organize and manage a nation of over 2 million people. He studied under Moses, absorbing not just tactical knowledge but spiritual wisdom. He was learning that true leadership isn't about commanding people. It's about hearing from God and faithfully carrying out His instructions. Then came the moment everything changed. Moses climbed Mount Nebo, looked out over the promised land he would never enter, and breathed his last breath. The greatest leader in Israel's history was gone, and suddenly all eyes turned to Joshua. The weight of an entire nation's future rested on his shoulders. But God didn't leave Joshua to figure things out on his own. The same voice that had spoken to Moses now spoke directly to Joshua with words that would echo through eternity. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites." Notice what God didn't say. He didn't say, "Try to take the land." He didn't say, "See if you can conquer it." He said, "I am about to give it to them." The battle was already won in the spiritual realm. Joshua just needed to step into that victory. But God wasn't finished. He continued with a promise that would sustain Joshua through every challenge ahead. "I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." Can you imagine receiving a promise like that directly from the Creator of the universe? But notice that even with this incredible assurance, God felt the need to encourage Joshua 3 times in this conversation to be strong and courageous. Why? Because what lay ahead would require supernatural courage. Joshua was about to lead God's people into battles that would defy human logic and require divine intervention. The first test came immediately. Before Joshua could lead Israel into the promised land, he had to get them across the Jordan River. This might not sound like a big deal until you realize that it was harvest time and the Jordan was at flood stage. The river that was normally fordable in certain places was now a raging torrent, impossible to cross with an army, much less with families, livestock, and all their possessions. Any normal military commander would have waited for the flood to recede or spent months building boats and bridges. But Joshua had learned to think supernaturally. He had watched Moses part the Red Sea 40 years earlier. He had seen God provide water from rocks and food from heaven. He knew that when God gives an instruction, he also provides the power to carry it out. So Joshua gave an order that must have seemed insane to anyone thinking naturally. "When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before." The Ark of the Covenant wasn't just a religious symbol. It represented the very presence of God among his people. Joshua was essentially saying, "We're going to follow God's presence even into a flooding river, because where God goes, he makes a way." What happened next would become one of the most remarkable miracles in human history, setting the stage for even greater supernatural interventions to come. As the priests carrying the ark approached the edge of the raging Jordan River, they didn't stop, they didn't hesitate, they didn't wait for the water to part first. They stepped into the flood, and the moment their feet touched the water, the impossible happened. The Jordan River stopped flowing, not just slowed down, not just got shallow, but completely stopped. The water that was flowing down toward the Dead Sea piled up in a heap far upstream, while the water below ran out completely, leaving dry ground for Israel to cross on. But here's what makes this miracle even more incredible. It wasn't just a temporary suspension of natural laws. Archaeological evidence suggests that when the Jordan stopped flowing, it stopped long enough for over 2 million people, along with their livestock and possessions, to cross over safely. We're talking about a logistical operation that would challenge modern military planners accomplished through pure divine intervention. Joshua understood the significance of this moment. He ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to take stones from the middle of the riverbed where the priests had stood. These stones would become a permanent memorial to God's faithfulness. He wanted future generations to ask, "What do these stones mean?" so that the story of God's miraculous power would never be forgotten. As the last of the Israelites crossed over and the priests carrying the ark stepped up from the riverbed onto the opposite shore, the Jordan River resumed its natural flow. In an instant, it was as if nothing had happened, except that an entire nation had just experienced the impossible. But this was just the beginning. Joshua was about to face his first military challenge in the Promised Land, and it would require a strategy so bizarre that it would make military historians scratch their heads for thousands of years. The city of Jericho stood before them, seemingly impregnable, with walls so thick that houses were built on top of them. This fortress city was the key to conquering the entire region, and everyone knew it would be a formidable opponent. What Joshua didn't know was that his greatest victory was about to require the most unusual battle plan in military history, setting the stage for an even more incredible demonstration of divine power that would literally stop the sun in its tracks. Joshua stood before the walls of Jericho, and what he saw would have intimidated any reasonable military commander. These weren't just walls, they were massive fortifications that had protected the city for generations. Archaeological evidence shows these walls were approximately 15 feet thick and 25 feet high, with an additional retaining wall at the base, creating a double fortification system. Houses were literally built into the wall structure itself, making it a living, breathing fortress filled with defenders. Any conventional army would have needed siege equipment, months of preparation, and thousands of casualties to even attempt breaching such defenses. But Joshua was about to learn that God's battle plans don't follow human military manuals. As Joshua surveyed the seemingly impossible task before him, something extraordinary happened. The Bible records that he looked up and saw a man standing near him with a drawn sword in his hand. This wasn't just any warrior. When Joshua approached and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" the figure replied, "Neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Joshua immediately understood he was in the presence of divine authority. He fell face down in reverence and asked, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander's response was both simple and profound. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." This wasn't just a religious moment. This was a strategic briefing from heaven itself. Joshua was about to receive battle instructions that would revolutionize everything he thought he knew about warfare. The commander of the Lord's army was about to reveal a plan so unconventional that it would become one of the most studied military strategies in human history. Here's where the story gets absolutely incredible. God's battle plan for Jericho involved no battering rams, no siege towers, no conventional weapons of war. Instead, Joshua received instructions that must have sounded completely insane to anyone with military experience. March around the city once a day for 6 days, with 7 priests carrying trumpets made of ram's horns in front of the Ark of the Covenant. But that wasn't the strangest part. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and then the priests would sound a long blast on their trumpets. All the people would give a loud shout, and the walls of Jericho would collapse. Think about this from Joshua's perspective. He's facing his first major military challenge as Israel's leader. The entire nation is watching to see if he can fill Moses' shoes. The enemy is fortified behind seemingly impenetrable walls, and God tells him to defeat them by marching and shouting. This is where Joshua's decades of preparation paid off. He had learned that when God gives instructions, no matter how unconventional they seem, obedience brings victory. He had watched Moses stretch out his staff over the Red Sea. He had seen water come from rocks and bread fall from heaven. He understood that God's power operates beyond human logic. So Joshua gathered the people and explained the plan. Can you imagine that conversation? Listen, everyone. Here's how we're going to conquer the most fortified city in Canaan. We're going to walk around it. That's it. Just walk. Oh, and we're going to stay completely silent except for the priests with the trumpets. For 6 days, this bizarre procession took place. Every morning, the army of Israel would line up, first the armed guard, then 7 priests with ram's horn trumpets, then the Ark of the Covenant carried by more priests, and finally the rear guard. They would march around Jericho once in complete silence, except for the sound of the trumpets, then return to their camp. Imagine what the people inside Jericho were thinking. At first, they probably laughed. What kind of military strategy is this? Are they trying to make us dizzy? But as day after day passed with the same silent procession, something else must have begun to creep into their hearts. Dread. There's something psychologically terrifying about an enemy that doesn't behave according to normal patterns. The defenders of Jericho were prepared for siege warfare, scaling ladders, battering rams. They weren't prepared for this eerie, supernatural patience. Each day, as they watched Israel's disciplined march around their city, they must have wondered, what do they know that we don't? Meanwhile, Joshua was teaching his people one of the most important lessons in spiritual warfare. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from human effort, but from divine intervention activated by simple obedience. Every step around those walls was an act of faith. Every silent march was a declaration that they trusted God's plan more than their own military wisdom. Then came the 7th day. Instead of marching once around the city, they kept going. 2nd time around, 3rd time, 4th time. Can you imagine the tension building inside those walls? The defenders of Jericho must have realized that something was different about this day. This wasn't just another mysterious march. This was building to something climactic. On the 7th circuit of the 7th day, Joshua gave the command that would echo through history, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The priests sounded their trumpets with a long, sustained blast. The entire army of Israel raised their voices in a mighty war cry that shook the ground. And then the impossible happened. The massive walls of Jericho, which had stood for generations, which had been built to withstand any assault, simply collapsed. Not gradually, not in sections, but completely and instantly. Archaeological excavations at the site of ancient Jericho have found evidence of walls that fell outward, creating ramps of rubble that would allow attackers to charge straight up and into the city. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The collapse was so complete and so precisely controlled that one section of the wall remained standing. This was the section where Rahab the prostitute lived, the woman who had helped Joshua's spies and been promised safety in return. In the midst of total destruction, God's precision protected the one family that had shown faith in Israel's God. The victory at Jericho sent shockwaves throughout the entire region. Word spread quickly that the Israelites possessed a power beyond normal military might. They had conquered one of the most fortified cities in Canaan without losing a single soldier, without building a single siege engine, simply by following their God's unconventional instructions. But this was just preparing Joshua for an even greater challenge, one that would require not just faith in God's power over human enemies, but faith in his authority over the very laws of nature. The stage was being set for the most incredible demonstration of divine power in military history, when Joshua would literally command the sun and moon to stand still in the heavens. The momentum from Jericho's fall carried Israel through several more victories, but it also attracted the attention of a coalition of enemy kings who realized they were facing an existential threat. 5 Amorite kings formed an alliance and decided to make their stand at Gibeon, a strategic city that had recently made a peace treaty with Israel. When the Gibeonites sent an urgent message to Joshua asking for help, he faced a critical decision. This wouldn't be another siege against a stationary target. This would be mobile warfare against multiple armies commanded by experienced kings. The logistics alone were daunting. His forces were camped at Gilgal, near the Jordan River, while Gibeon was in the hill country, a challenging march even without the prospect of battle at the end. But Joshua had learned to think strategically under pressure. If he could defeat this coalition of 5 kings in one decisive battle, it would break the back of organized resistance in the central region of Canaan. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. What happened next demonstrates the kind of leader Joshua had become. Instead of spending days planning and preparing, he made a decision that revealed both his military genius and his absolute trust in divine guidance. He ordered a forced march that very night, covering the rough terrain between Gilgal and Gibeon in darkness to achieve complete tactical surprise. The Bible records that the Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a supernatural rout. The enemy forces, expecting to besiege Gibeon at their leisure, suddenly found themselves under attack by an army they thought was still miles away. But what makes this battle legendary isn't just the tactical surprise or even the initial victory. It's what happened next, when Joshua realized that daylight was running out and his enemies were escaping under cover of approaching darkness. Standing on that ancient battlefield, with victory within his grasp but time slipping away, Joshua made a decision that would echo through eternity. He wasn't just going to ask God to help him win the battle, he was going to ask God to suspend the fundamental laws of physics to ensure complete victory. This is the moment when Joshua stepped beyond the realm of ordinary faith into something that defies every scientific principle we understand. Picture the scene. The sun is beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The 5 kings and their armies are scattered and fleeing, but Joshua knows that if darkness falls, they'll escape to fight another day. The opportunity to end this threat once and for all is slipping away with every passing minute. What would you do in that situation? Accept that you've won a partial victory and hope for the best. Send out pursuit forces and pray they could catch the fleeing enemies before they reached safety. Not Joshua. This man, who had learned to think supernaturally, who had watched walls fall at the sound of trumpets, who had seen rivers stop flowing at God's command, made a decision that still gives physicists nightmares. Joshua looked up at the sun and spoke words that would be remembered for thousands of years. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. He didn't whisper this prayer privately. He didn't quietly ask God for help. The Bible specifically says he spoke this command in the presence of Israel. He publicly, boldly, audaciously commanded the celestial bodies to halt their movement across the sky. And here's where the story becomes absolutely mind-blowing. They obeyed. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. The moon remained in its position over the valley of Ajalon. For approximately 24 hours, the normal rotation of the Earth was suspended, the laws of physics were put on hold, and the Creator of the universe responded to the prayer of a human being by stopping time itself. Let's pause for a moment and consider the magnitude of what happened here. We're not talking about a localized miracle that affected just one person or even one army. We're talking about a cosmic intervention that would have been visible across multiple continents. The Earth, which spins at approximately 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, suddenly stopped its rotation. The Sun, which appears to move across the sky due to our planet's rotation, remained fixed in position for an entire day. The scientific implications are staggering. If the Earth suddenly stopped rotating, the momentum would cause catastrophic effects. Massive earthquakes, tsunamis, atmospheric disruption. Yet the Bible records this as a controlled miracle with no negative consequences. God didn't just stop the Earth's rotation. He suspended the natural consequences of doing so, maintaining perfect environmental stability while the laws of physics took a 24-hour vacation. But why would God perform such an extraordinary miracle for a military campaign? Because this wasn't just about one battle. This was about establishing his people in the land he had promised them, about creating a nation through which his purposes for all humanity would be fulfilled. The victory that day didn't just defeat 5 enemy kings. It broke the back of organized resistance throughout the entire region. Think about the psychological impact on Israel's enemies. Word spread quickly that the Israelites served a God who could command the sun and moon. No amount of military strategy, no fortress walls, no alliance of kings could stand against a people whose God controlled the very movements of celestial bodies. The reputation of Israel's God became a weapon more powerful than any sword or spear. Joshua understood something that many modern believers miss. When you're aligned with God's purposes, you can pray with absolute boldness. He wasn't asking God to do something selfish or destructive. He was asking for the power to complete a victory that would establish God's people in their promised inheritance. His prayer was born not from personal ambition, but from spiritual conviction that he was carrying out divine will. The Bible emphasizes that there has never been a day like it before or since, when the Lord listened to a human being in such a dramatic way. This wasn't just answered prayer. This was the Creator of the universe responding to human faith with a demonstration of power that transcended natural law. But Joshua's day of supernatural warfare wasn't finished. While the sun stood still, he pressed his advantage completely. The fleeing kings tried to hide in a cave at Makkedah, but they were discovered and trapped inside. Joshua ordered large stones to be rolled against the mouth of the cave, posting guards while he continued pursuing and destroying the scattered armies. The victory was so complete that the Bible records no survivors among the enemy forces. When Joshua finally returned to deal with the trapped kings, he made them an object lesson for all his commanders. He had them brought out and made them lie down so his officers could put their feet on their necks. Then he spoke words that revealed the heart of his leadership. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight. After this demonstration, Joshua executed the 5 kings and hung their bodies on trees until evening, when he had them taken down and thrown into the same cave where they had tried to hide. Large stones were piled over the cave entrance as a permanent memorial to God's victory. This single day of supernatural warfare changed the entire military landscape of Canaan. The southern coalition was completely destroyed. The psychological impact spread throughout the region like wildfire. City after city either fled or surrendered rather than face an army whose God could stop the sun. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this story is what it reveals about the kind of relationship God wants to have with his people. Joshua didn't perform this miracle through his own power or wisdom. He simply believed that the God who had called him to lead was powerful enough to do whatever the situation required. His prayer came from a heart that had learned to think beyond human limitations. This is where Joshua's decades of preparation truly paid off. All those years serving Moses, watching miracles, learning to trust God's unconventional methods, had prepared him for this moment when ordinary faith wasn't enough. He needed supernatural faith, the kind that could look at impossible circumstances and still believe that God's power was greater than any natural law. The day the sun stood still became more than just a military victory. It became a testimony that echoes through history. It demonstrates that when human faith aligns with divine purpose, there are no limits to what God will do. Joshua's prayer didn't just stop the sun, it revealed the heart of a God who responds to bold faith with supernatural power. Modern skeptics often try to explain away this miracle, suggesting it was merely a solar eclipse or some other natural phenomenon. But the Bible is clear about what happened. This was a day unlike any other, when the normal order of creation was suspended in response to human prayer. It stands as one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine power in all of human history. The implications of this miracle extend far beyond ancient warfare. It reveals fundamental truths about the nature of God and his relationship with those who trust him completely. It shows us that the same God who spoke the universe into existence is still actively involved in human affairs, still responding to faith with power that transcends natural limitations. As we continue Joshua's story, we'll see how this incredible demonstration of divine power positioned him to complete the conquest of the Promised Land and establish a legacy that would influence the course of world history. The man who commanded the sun was just getting started, and his greatest achievements still lay ahead. Joshua's victory at Gibeon sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world, but the man who had commanded the sun wasn't finished reshaping the map of Canaan. What happened next would demonstrate that the miracle of the long day was just the beginning of a campaign that would become the most decisive military conquest in ancient history. The news of 5 kings defeated in a single day, with the sun itself serving as Israel's ally, spread faster than Joshua's armies could march. But instead of intimidating all his enemies into submission, it had an unexpected effect on one particular group. The northern kings, led by Jabin, king of Hazor, realized that facing Israel piecemeal was a death sentence. If they were going to survive, they needed to combine every available force into one massive alliance. What they assembled was staggering. The Bible describes it as an army huge as the sand on the seashore, with a large number of horses and chariots. This wasn't just another coalition of city-states. This was the ancient equivalent of a superpower, mobilizing everything it had. Hazor alone was described as the head of all these kingdoms, suggesting a level of organization and military sophistication that far exceeded anything Israel had faced before. The location they chose for their showdown reveals their strategic thinking. They gathered at the waters of Merom, in the northern part of Canaan, far from where Joshua had just demonstrated God's supernatural intervention. Perhaps they thought distance from Gibeon would somehow limit the power of Israel's God. Perhaps they believed their superior numbers and advanced military technology would be enough to overwhelm divine intervention. They were about to learn that geography means nothing when you're fighting against the creator of the universe. But here's where Joshua's character truly shines. Any reasonable military commander, having just witnessed the sun stand still in response to his prayer, might have become overconfident. After all, if God was willing to suspend the laws of physics for your battle plans, what enemy could possibly pose a real threat? Yet Joshua approached this northern coalition with the same careful preparation and absolute dependence on God that had characterized his entire military career. Before the battle, God spoke to Joshua with both encouragement and specific tactical instructions. Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them, slain, over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. This wasn't just a promise of victory, it was a detailed battle plan that revealed something crucial about God's strategy for his people. And there you have it, the untold story of Joshua, the man who literally commanded the sun to stand still and watched as the creator of the universe responded with power that defies imagination. From a humble servant learning in Moses' shadow to the commander who brought down walls with shouts and stopped time itself through prayer, Joshua's life demonstrates that when human faith aligns with divine purpose, absolutely nothing is impossible. His legacy reminds us that the same God who suspended the laws of physics for one man's bold prayer is still responding to faith today, still moving mountains, still working miracles for those brave enough to believe beyond human limitations.